All right. The last of our core systems is a free market system. So this is the complete opposite of a command economy, right? If we have a spectrum here, they are nowhere near each other. One is on one side, the other's on the other. So again, when we're looking at who gets to make the decisions when it comes to using resources and deciding what to make and how to make it and who gets what, that decision is made by the consumers and the producers. So if command economy has pure government control in a free market, there is absolutely no government, zero whatsoever. Now, that doesn't mean a government doesn't exist. That means there's no government intervention in the economy. So the government's job is there to provide law and order and to protect your political rights and your natural rights and societal kind of things. But when it comes to businesses or resources or goods and services or workers, they have absolutely nothing to do with it. They don't make any laws about it. They don't have any kind of anything for it, right? And so this system allows the people themselves to make the decisions, right? They talk to each other non-verbally, and they send signals to each other that allows the market, the economy, to make adjustments and to make sure things are happening. All right. So one of the big things with that, we're talking no government. You've probably heard the phrase before, but the French call that laissez-faire. All right. I'm probably not saying that the most French way, but that's what we're talking about here. This idea of laissez-faire, when you hear that, that means that a government hands out. You just let the economy do its thing. So there is a thought here with the free market, something called the invisible hand. So if we have businesses and consumers that are making the decisions, right? And let's say a business makes a product that is faulty and it breaks a lot, right? When people buy that product and then it starts breaking, the more people start talking about that and they're like, yeah, I bought this thing and it broke. And they're like, oh my gosh, I bought it and it broke too. That word spreads, right? And so eventually people would stop buying that product. And if the business notices, hey, our sales have dropped in this thing, we might want to change something. That's the invisible hand, right? That you didn't need the government to come in and tell consumers, hey, this product's bad, you shouldn't buy it. They can figure it out themselves because they're smart. And businesses don't need to be told, you shouldn't make this faulty product, because they'll just not make money. And that will be their signal that they need to adjust. So that's the idea of the invisible hand. It's the supply and demand principles that guide systems here. So that is where the focus for the free market is going to rely on, is that you just have these groups working together here. So when we look at the questions, what, how, for whom, the consumers are the ones that answer what to produce. Businesses are going to make whatever consumers buy. Okay, so if you are a consumer, you have a vote because you spend your money. That is your vote, right? When you spend money on something, you're saying, I want this product. And businesses say, cool, we're going to make that product then. So if you're not wanting to spend a lot of money on something, businesses don't want to make that product, right? Which can be a bad thing. We'll talk about here in a little bit. But consumers get to decide what is produced. Businesses get to decide how they're making that, right? If it's their company and they don't really have any laws to focus on, right? Because they're not in place because there's no government intervention, they are free to operate how they want. So they want to find the best manner to produce, because that's going to allow them to operate in the cheapest way possible so they can maximize their profit. That doesn't mean everything's going to be super cheap and they're going to treat employees like crap or anything like that. That just means they're going to find the cheapest method, the best method to make their product available to people. Okay, for whom is decided by both, right? Businesses get to set their prices, and consumers, if they don't like the price, they don't buy it. And so businesses would adjust and they would lower their prices. So you're going to see the most fair prices existing here, assuming that there's competition, right? If a business doesn't have competition, then consumers aren't going to have as much of a say. But in this system, there's quite a bit of competition. So you're going to see pretty fair prices, but it's the prices that decide for whom. Whoever can afford it is who's going to get access to it. Okay, so the questions here are a little bit different than our other systems, but together they're the ones answering this. So with a free market, obviously it's in the name, free. So economic freedom is the most important thing, the top goal for this system, right? That you, as individuals, own the resources. And so you get to make the decisions about those, right? You own your labor, your ability to do a job. So you should get to choose how you want to use that ability, right? And if you open a business, that's your business. So you should be able to make that decision for yourself. And nobody else should be able to come in and tell you what to do or how to do it or what to make or anything like that. So that for a free market is the most important thing. It is also a really great thing in this system because of that that invisible hand principles, that we see these systems changing as society changes, right? So when as consumers, we're like, we no longer like how you're producing that product, so we're not going to buy your product because we think using child labor is wrong. Businesses will be like, okay, we'll stop using child labor so you buy our products because we want to make money, right? And so you're going to see that changing as our values change, as our what's acceptable and not acceptable changes. Businesses will adjust with that. And so you're going to see a lot of growth. You're going to see a lot of advancement. And you would see fairer practices because businesses would want to make money and consumers know they have the ability to control those things, right? So you are going to see those changes. Now, if something is needed for the country that may not have a lot of profit attached to it, it will be harder to make those kinds of changes because that would require the government to come in and say, hey, we need this thing. And they don't do that in a free market. So as society changes, you see it, but sometimes you may not see some big changes happen. We'll talk a little bit more here shortly. All right. You're also going to see, as a consumer, a lot of variety. You're going to have access to all kinds of options because there's going to be a ton of competition in this system. They're very big on competition because everybody should have a chance to own the business if they want to. And the more businesses there are, the more competition there is. There's a lot of individualism in this system, that it's up to you to do things. And so we're going to see lots of options for consumers in the things that we want to buy because that's where we're willing to spend the money at. Now, the system is not all great. There are some downsides to this system here. One of the big ones is that there is very little to almost no economic security, right? Because that economic security comes from the government, that they have programs. If there's big economic problems, they're there to help out. And there is no government intervention, so there's no government programs, right? So if you're working and you lose your job, you better hope you have some savings or you can find a new job quickly because there's nothing to hold you over between jobs, right? There's no unemployment because there's no government intervention. If you're sick or disabled or get hurt on the job, unless your job is offering to pay for that, there is none of that. There is no support for any of those groups, right? And so it does leave out a lot of people if they're not able to provide for themselves because that individualism is so highly valued that there's not this collective thought of let's all make sure everybody's being cared for, right? So you'll have family and whatnot for some individuals, but there's still going to be a lot of people that are left out that aren't going to benefit in this system. There's also a high degree of uncertainty because at any point a business can be like, hey, I found someone else that can do the job cheaper, so I'm going to hire them. They're going to be just as good as you, and they're willing to work for less. And you'll just be out of job, right? Businesses could decide, hey, we're going to move to a different state because it's cheaper there with tax, and so they just move, right? And then you're out of a job if you can't follow. So a lot of uncertainty that exists here. There's also not going to be any kind of public goods. Because those come from the government. So public goods are things that everybody has access to, and your use doesn't take away from somebody else's. So for example, roads, right? Everybody can drive on a road, and if I drive down 24, that doesn't mean nobody else is able to drive down it, right? But that comes from the government. That comes through taxes. And there is none of that in a free market. And so if you want a nice road to drive on, you either one have to pay for it yourself. And then if you put up all that money for a nice road to drive on and other people want to drive on it, you're going to charge them. It's going to be a toll road, right? Or the community will come together and everybody will pool their money. But then again, you're going to want to make your money back, so you're going to end up charging for those kinds of things. Like police and fire department would charge for that and say, okay, your house is on fire. It's going to be $2,000. What card do you want to put it on? Right? There would be no free services because that comes from the government. And if we're not having government intervention, then they don't exist that way. All right. So that would be our three main ones. Now, as we look at the world, there is no example of a free market economy. There's always some government intervention. And so most economies in the world today are what we call a mixed economy. So they take a little bit from each of our core systems and they say, okay, we would like this idea of traditional, but we also like this idea of free market and maybe a little bit of command. And this is what we end up with, right? So almost every country in the world is a mixed economy, and it slightly is differently depending on how much command or how much free market they value, right? And so there's a spectrum here of where our economic systems would fall, and it comes down to that idea here. All right, so these are our core systems. We're going to talk about some other ones that have evolved from these, but that will be later this week.